Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Women's Bar Association Anniversary Celebration, also known as our virtual annual dinner. My name is Jill Dash, and I'm the president of the Women's Bar Association of the District of Columbia. On behalf of the WBA, the WBA Foundation, and our boards of directors, we're delighted that you've joined us, particularly for this evening. A housekeeping note before we get underway. I hope you noticed that on our invitation, the program asks that you wear your suffragette white, as I am, to commemorate the centennial of the 19th Amendment. We want to see you, but unfortunately we're in this webinar format. So please take a picture of yourself and put it on social media. Use the hashtag WBA at 103. Put yourself on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all three. I did manage to get a Twitter picture in before we started. And feel free to use that hashtag throughout the program if you want to make comments. You know, in May for the Women's Bar Association, that means annual dinner time. It's time to commit to scooting out of your office, often a little bit earlier than we normally would, knowing that we're headed out to see old friends, some of them decades old relationships, and also to meet up and be inspired by new friends. If you've joined us before, you know it's a chance to look around a full room at the beautiful National Building Museum and see how many of us are working toward a more equal legal profession. It's a time to re-energize and rededicate yourself to mentoring women and lifting up their accomplishments. We're still hopeful we can gather there live on October 8th so that we can honor our Woman Lawyer of the Year this year, Jeannie Rhee at Paul Weiss, and so that we can hear remarks from the fantastic Colleen Jenkins on the centennial of the 19th Amendment. Colleen is the great-great-granddaughter of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and if you have seen me sometime between last summer and now, you have heard me rave about Colleen. But we felt compelled to mark this important occasion today in May as we close out one bar year and gear up for the next. So thank you for being with us here tonight. I hope that everyone is staying healthy and safe. And I eagerly await a time when we can gather together again. In the meantime, we're determined to make this format work and do for us as much as it possibly can. So let me tell you a little bit about the evening's agenda. We're going to hear brief recorded remarks from Senator Kamala Harris of California and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we've been up to this year. We're going to hear from our WBA Foundation President, Bridget Bailey Lipscomb. We're going to hear from our keynote speaker, Dahlia Lithwick. We're going to celebrate our past president, Patricia Gurne, whom we lost last month. And then we'll get a preview of the next bar year from our soon-to-be president, Sadina Montani. And in our determination to make this as fun as it possibly can be in abnormal times, we're gonna have a Zoom party after all of this so I can see all of your smiling faces. You should have received a separate link with your registration. And so you will meet us on a separate link for the after party. And I'm so sorry to say that dinner will be on your own because our annual dinner caterer, RSVP Catering, who always does a fantastic job, had the most beautiful chicken dish with suffragette colors with gold tomatoes on top and purple potatoes on the bottom. And my poor board has not stopped hearing me talk about the purple potatoes. So you'll just have to use your imagination, but you would have been wowed. Before we get started here, I of course have some thank yous to share. First, I want to thank our early sponsors for this event. We didn't do a full sponsorship push once we knew we'd be doing this virtually, but some organizations were kind enough to sponsor us early in these efforts. So at the leadership level, thank you to Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. At the benefactor level, Freddie Mac. At the underwriter level, Wiley Ryan. At the advocate level, Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld. And really, thank you to all of our sponsors throughout the year, both the institutional sponsors and the individuals, because we cannot do this, to have these programs and these important conversations without your support And obviously we need that now more than ever. Next, I'd like to thank my fantastic board, and I hope all of you will stand up at your screens and take a bow. Our President-elect, Sadina Montani, Treasurer, Sasha Hodge-Wren, Treasurer-elect, Lauren Brown, Secretary, Renee Lauren Ellis, and our directors, Candace Beck, Ann Collier, Candace Gibson, Cynthia Hemphill, Sherlyn Johansson, Charlotte Cunin, Kathy Pagano, Anna Ratner, Michelle Turner-Roberts, Natalie Roisman, Rebecca Simon, and Roya Visegi, and of course, our immediate past president, Yolanda Hawkins Bautista, who unfortunately is now rolling off the board, but I am sure that we will all be hearing from past President Hawkins Bautista. I'd like to recognize our past presidents also, the backbone of this organization, the cheerleaders, the soothsayers, the wisdom of the operation. I would not be here if not for you. Thank you for your continued support and dedication. I'd also like to thank our co-chairs who lead our programming throughout the year and who each year bring new energy and enthusiasm to this organization. I hope you will also take a bow. I'd like to thank our Executive Director, Carol Montoya, and her staff, Lena Walls, Tamishka Harris, and Rebecca Epstein. Thank you also to my ACS colleagues who've been a steady source of support in this endeavor and so many endeavors. And finally, I'd like to thank my family, my husband, Jerome, who has the fate of being surrounded by women even when it's not the WBA, and my daughters, Maya and Harper. I could not have taken on this role without their support and tolerance, as mommy was off to yet another meeting. You know, one day when my daughter Harper, who's 4, was feeling particularly rebellious, she told me that she was going to a meeting, but with boys, because going to a meeting with boys instead of the WBA is what counts for rebellion in my house. And Maya has spent the entire year trying to impress her 3rd grade class with mommy's new title. Hi, my mommy is the president of the Women's Bar Association. They were not as impressed as you might think. Okay, so now it is my great pleasure to share with you messages from Senator Kamala Harris of California and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, who both kindly sent video greetings, although they could not be here with us, whatever here with us means in this virtual world. You know, there's only 26 women in the Senate. Of course, way fewer if you're counting women of color alone. It is, of course, a record number for what it is, but it's not high enough. We feel very lucky, though, to have 2 of them here with us, even if virtually tonight. Please enjoy.
Greetings to the Women's Bar Association of DC, and Jill, thank you all for your leadership. Listen, I know we're living in very challenging times and we're in the midst of a crisis, but what you all are doing to encourage young women to enter our profession, what you are doing to fight for that pipeline, what you are doing to empower women in our profession is so extremely important, because women are on the front lines, and as we know, our nation needs women in roles of leadership to get through this and so much else. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for building community and building power. Take care.
Good evening, Women's Bar Association of DC. It's Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. I'm so pleased that I could be part of your annual dinner and celebrate the work you do to advocate for women. Your mission to increase women's representation in law firms, legislatures, and in the community has been at the heart of my family for generations. My grandmother organized women in political campaigns when women weren't supposed to have political power. My mother was one of only 3 women in her law school class. They taught me that if there isn't space for you, you make your own. They also taught me that if women want to be heard, we have to use our voices. That's what the Women's Bar Association has been doing for more than 100 years. From WBA member Catherine Sellers, who made history as the first federally appointed woman judge in 1918, to the work you do today, training women to run for office. Your work opens doors for women so that they can walk into new rooms and enter the conversation. As we celebrate the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, we celebrate the progress that generations of women have fought for and won in this country. We also recognize that those fights are not over. Too many women still earn less than their male colleagues doing the same work. Too many women survive sexual assault or harassment only to face hurdles in their path to justice. And too many women still lack access to health care and paid leave they need and deserve. It's our job to use the law to help them and to advocate for them in courts, in businesses, and in Congress, especially as women bear the brunt of this pandemic, playing essential roles as nurses, pharmacists, and grocery store clerks. As recognition of the role being played by women grows, we must push for major shifts in the way our economy treats women. That means electing more women. It means providing women with equal pay for equal work. It means taking sexual assault and harassment seriously. And it means providing universal paid leave so that no one is forced to choose between their job and caring for their family. That's what I've been fighting for. I know your theme for the year is building community, building power. So let's find strength in numbers. The more we work together, the more we can do. I'm glad to have you alongside me in the fight for a better future. Take care, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of your night.
And here we are. We're back. Okay. Well, I hope you noticed that Senator Gillibrand was even wearing her suffragette white. I did not tell her to do that. She is that good. And we'll give Senator Harris half credit because her blouse was white. We want to talk a little bit about what we accomplished this year. And I will say one of the reasons that we wanted to gather here tonight is to mark the close of our 2019-2020 bar year. Our theme for this year has been building community, building power. It recognizes that women still lack representation in so many spaces, but if we work collectively with determination and creativity, we will break down barriers and achieve great things. And of course, along with our theme, we kicked off the celebration of the centennial of the 19th Amendment. We started the year with a trip to Seneca Falls, New York. The park ranger for Wesleyan Chapel welcomed us all home. And we heard from Colleen Jenkins, who I mentioned earlier, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's great-great-granddaughter, and who I believe is here with us tonight. We heard from Ken Morris, Frederick Douglass's great-great-great-grandson, and then Pauline Copes Johnson, who is Harriet Tubman's great-great-grandniece. And then we got to sign the Declaration of Sentiments. It was incredibly magical. And as we kicked off the fall, we had that in our spirit and moved on from there. We celebrated the rule of law and women of the federal bench as our stars of the bar. That turned out to be an especially important moment as we came back in February to issue a statement supporting Judge Amy Berman Jackson after she was attacked by presidential tweet about the Roger Stone trial. As the Supreme Court's October term kicked off, we hosted a conversation, Where Are the Women?, highlighting the lack of women arguing at the podium and not for lack of a pipeline. Looking back at the 2019 term, Kimberly Robinson of Bloomberg said just last week that of the 156 lawyers who argued at the podium, 20 of them were women, 13%. For the January sitting, there were more advocates named Jonathan than there were women. This obviously has to change. We also spent some time this year discussing the fate of women outside the law. Inspired by the women's U.S. national soccer team, in October, we hosted Equal Play, Equal Pay to talk about women in sports who, surprise, surprise, contend with many of the same inequities as women in the law and other professions. Inferior playing fields, inferior travel arrangements, lack of merchandising opportunities, not even the same access to counsel to address these issues. So someday in the future, we will all go to sporting events again, And I implore you to buy tickets to see the Spirit and the Mystics if you're in Washington, D.C., or to look at your local women's teams wherever you are. I assure you that you will see your WBA friends at these games in D.C. We also talked about the plight of women in prisons and their lack of resources and the way they bond together to lift each other up. We started the conversation around presidential appointments as we gear up for an election year this year. We are determined to fill up the proverbial binders of women. So if that career path is of interest to you, we should talk. We also hosted our first ever WBA Salon, a conversation about how best to lift up the next generation of women all across different legal sectors. We plan to replicate that conversation later this month and going forward into the future. And just last week, we hosted a program on running for office, followed by a conversation on how we've moved from adoption of the 19th Amendment to the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment, which we still do not have, but it's coming. We hosted programs throughout the year about maximizing networking and career opportunities. We talked about women leading in climate change and in immigration courts. And in addition to our programming, we signed on to 7 amicus briefs and endorsed 5 individuals for various judicial positions. We're also kicking off our first ever high school speech competition. That deadline is May 29th, and there's a cash prize. So if you know of any inspiring high school girls, please send them our way. I also want to highlight that over the last several weeks, as we have had to retreat to our homes, we've really done our best to rise to the occasion and provide programming on everything from navigating virtual communication challenges to our virtual happy hour series so that folks could see some happy faces in scary times. And as you'll hear from Sadina, we have much more planned. Listen, these are hard times, but the WBA is determined to stay relevant and be a resource for our members and non-members alike. Our country could not be facing more serious issues, but the WBA has the benefit of being a 103-year-old organization, and we've been through a lot. World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, 9/11, and numerous economic downturns. But as long as people need lawyers and women need equal representation, the WBA will be here. And so I hope you join us and let us provide you with support wherever you are in your career. And now I'm going to turn things over to the president of the WBA Foundation, Bridget Bailey Lipscomb, who will talk to you a little bit about what they've been up to.
Thank you so much, Jill. The foundation congratulates our sister organization, the association, on 103 years of supporting, advancing, and promoting women. And we have been honored to stand side by side with you as you commemorated the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Great work. So this is what the foundation has been doing for the last year and continuously through COVID-19. Through your generosity, we have been able to help domestic violence victims, immigrant women, sex trafficking victims, and elderly women, to name a few. In line with our mission to support the legal and related needs of women and girls in DC, we are very proud to report to you that the foundation has awarded at least $845,000 in grants since its inception in 1981. And we expect our giving to exceed $1 million in 2021. So notwithstanding COVID-19, the foundation has had a record year, starting with our celebration of the 10-year anniversary for our Chef's Dine-In that was hosted at the home of Association past president and our dear friend, Paulette Chapman, where we more than tripled our average collections. Next, during our 17th annual wine tasting and silent auction entitled Wines from Down Under, We enjoyed Australian wines as we partied with a purpose and exceeded our fundraising goal. During our grant award ceremony, we awarded $95,000 in grants to 12 deserving grantees, including 2 signature grants. The Suzanne Richards Memorial Grant went to the Legal Counsel for the Elderly, and the Jennifer Porter Grant went to First Shift Justice Project. During our second annual Donor Appreciation Reception, which was actually virtual this year, we presented a 2020 Suzanne Richards Scholarship to Liz Davis, who was an intern for one of our grantees, the Legal Aid Society. And like our other online campaigns, we exceeded our Do More 24 fundraising goal, even though, due to COVID-19, we did not have the annual dinner audience like we have had during the last 2 Do More 24 campaigns. But we had a virtual meeting, and we had representatives from 4 of our grantees: Safe Sister Circle, DC Volunteer Lawyers Project, Legal Counsel for the Elderly, and Amara Legal Center. And they all reported updates on their service during this COVID-19 era. We are ecstatic to report to you that we exceeded our annual fundraising goal, and we have been good stewards of your charitable donations. In addition to awarding more grant funds than ever before, we honored founder Suzanne Richards and past president Jennifer Porter. And our 2020 Suzanne Richards Scholarship will support a future lawyer who is committed to nonprofits that help women and girls. The foundation has an outstanding, committed, and dedicated board of directors, but it does not have members. So none of these programs would be possible without your generous donations. And as outgoing president of this impactful organization, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that you can actually make a donation tonight at www.kindful.com. And if you want to wait until after this program, just go to our website. Again, it's www.kindful.com. I want to thank the board of directors for the Women's Bar Association Foundation. You have been phenomenal. And finally, on behalf of the foundation and the many, many women and girls who have benefited from your kindness, I thank you. I thank you for your committed support. I thank you for your constant support. I thank you for allowing us to help others. And in the words of Theodore Roosevelt, this country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless it is a good place for all of us to live in.
Thank you so much, Bridget. You know, Bridget comes across with this very gentle smile, but don't let her fool you. She's a killer. That smile will get all of your money out of your pocket. So that's why she does it. Well, thank you, Bridget. We really appreciate that. So now moving on, it is my really great honor to introduce to you the fabulous Dahlia Lithwick. I must say one benefit of everything being on Zoom is the total breakdown of geographical barriers, because Dahlia comes to us from her home in New York, and you are in for a real treat. And some of you know that because I watched the RSVP numbers tick up after we announced that Dahlia was keynoting this program. To know Dahlia and her writing is to go from cackling one moment about her description of her experience wearing Axe body spray for a week, to being gutted by her description of what it means to wade our way through this pandemic and these incredibly unusual times. She has used her eloquence to put into words what many of us cannot: her experiences with miscarriage, with sexual harassment, her lens on the rule of law and the role of lawyers. Dahlia is a senior editor at Slate, and in that capacity has been writing their Supreme Court dispatches and jurisprudence columns since 1999. She's the host of Amicus, Slate's award-winning biweekly podcast about the law and the Supreme Court. Dahlia earned her BA in English from Yale and her JD from Stanford. She's currently working on a new book, Lady Justice. I am so grateful that Dahlia was able to be with us here this evening. Please join me in welcoming Dahlia Lithwick.
So thank you so much to Jill for that lovely introduction. The truth is, whenever Jill asks me to do anything, I say yes, but let's not tell her. Thank you to the Women's Bar Association, happy anniversary, and to the honorees, guests, the new board, all of you who are Zooming in. Thank you. I'm honored to be with you tonight, and I hope that you and your families and your loved ones are well and taking care from my virtual dais to your virtual dinner table. I send so much respect and regard. So I've been saying for quite some time now that I think that the spine of what is going to preserve constitutional democracy in our lifetimes, the thing to which we have to lash ourselves, particularly as women, is two things: journalism, the media, and having a vigilant press, and the law and the rule of law, and having vigilant and meticulous courts. And I suppose as a legal journalist, that seems rather self-serving. It also means that one would think I might have some special insight into how that project is going. And I think that it's fair to say that in both questions about the law and the rule of law and questions about a free and fair press and how the press is regarded, it does seem like a deeply troubling and destabilizing time. And that was even pre-COVID. And I think that I am not being controversial when I say that both of those things, a free press and a free and fair press and free and fair courts and the rule of law, are predicated on certain things that were once immutable and now seem to be in question. The first is a belief in knowable truth that can be ferreted out through smoking out different ideas and testing them in a public arena. The notion that language has some fixed meaning that we can all agree upon and from which we can derive certain truths. And the certainty that we all do better when our institutions do well. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that all of that has been really called into question, and now particularly, it sometimes feels as though the very ground beneath our feet isn't as firm as it was. And I want to be really clear that I think that believing institutions isn't magical thinking, whether it's the courts and the law or the free press and journalism. I think that you don't have to believe that those institutions are perfect or even perfectible to know that they are valuable and I would say essential in any democratic society. And I think you do have to be committed to the idea that part of what we have to do, again, particularly as women, is fight for those institutions, particularly when it feels as though they are under assault. So my job in recent years, and probably some of you have heard me saying this, is to fight on two fronts, to both fight for language and meaning and truth, to fight for the proposition that those things matter, but also to fight a kind of defensive war against creeping nihilism, against the sense that maybe nothing matters, or maybe everyone's a liar, or maybe everybody in this polarized moment is operating in bad faith. And I want to be very, very, very direct and say to you that that means that we are fighting on two fronts against nihilism in a way that is really quite exhausting. And yet, when I hear my son, who is 16, say things like, much less adorable than what Jill's kids will say, things like, all news is fake news, or all judges are political, It means that I have to fight both on the front of propping up those institutions for him, the generation that comes after him, for the young people that you all are trying to mentor and lift up. But it also means that we just have to keep fighting for truth, even in the midst of a growing belief that maybe truth is unknowable. And I want to just point out to you that as women, that becomes a really doubly tricky proposition. Why? Well, I saw this amazing graphic representation today that I wanted to share with you. And it mapped the entire 244-year history of the United States into a single calendar year. So 1776 is January 1st, and December 31st is right now. And if you look at that year, mapping out all of US history inside the scope of this one calendar year, perhaps not surprisingly, but to me astonishingly, it wasn't until August 3rd of this calendar year that women got the vote. It wasn't until November 17th of this calendar year that women reached even 10% representation in Congress. Not till November 20th is the first Black woman sworn into the Senate. And not until December 25th, just a week before New Year, is the first woman nominated to be president. And I don't point this kind of weird systemic representation out to alarm you, but simply to say that the institutions that I'm sitting here fighting for, the courts, the press, government, democracy itself, have not served women really all that well in this amount of time. And yet without them, even though we now have only in some sense been powerful for the blink of an eye, without them we will fare much worse. We have to fight for them because I truly believe that the alternative is not going to be as good as the system we have now. The alternative seems to me, and we see it all around us, around the world, is power, oligarchies, money, gaslighting, all of the things that really fly in the face of the kind of essential democratic truth that I think we are all fighting for. So when I worry, and I do worry, and I worry particularly when we are all in a situation where we are far apart, and as I said, the earth seems to be sliding out from under our feet, I take such heart from the women that we are hearing about tonight and celebrating tonight. I take such courage from the journalists who are fighting on the front line to tell the truth and tell the story, regardless of the horrific blowback and threats that they experience. I garner great courage from the lawyers who have just spiked into action and are filing lawsuits day and night to preserve and protect the right to vote, reproductive freedom, women's equality, all of the things that Senator Gillibrand talked about. And I derive such incredible inspiration and incredible meaning from the kinds of people, again, so many of them women, who are now being designated, quote unquote, essential workers because they're working as nurses, as doctors, as cleaners, as the carers for our elders and for our children. People who are called essential and yet not paid as though they are essential. Disproportionately women who are stepping out bravely and saying, of course I will do this. I have always done this. I will continue to do this. And I derive such meaning and such honor from women lawyers who, as Jill said, were not represented in front of the Supreme Court as they should have been this year. And were not perhaps represented around the country in government, in business, in law firms, in law schools, the way we should be at this time in history. But I want to stop and tell you something amazing. We just did interviews with every single woman who's still alive, who started Harvard with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And we're going to have a special podcast where you can hear from them in the coming weeks. And I assure you that every single one of them, almost to a one, met men at Harvard by cooking for them, by cooking dinners and having dinner groups and being rewarded for being good cooks and getting dates because they were good cooks. And while some of them have gone on to have astonishing legal careers and others have gone on to have completely interesting and perhaps not Supreme Court justice grade careers, hearing them talk reminds me that even though women only got the vote in our virtual August, we've come a long way. And I didn't cook dinners for men in law school. I hope none of you did, or if you did, you didn't do it to get a husband. We are moving, we are making progress as women and as lawyers. But I really want to urge you, particularly the young ones among you and the people that you mentor, that we have to keep fighting for the very proposition that law matters, that it is fixed and immutable, that the Constitution matters, that it is fixed and it is immutable, that journalism matters, that one should pay for it, and it is fixed and good and proper in a democracy to have it. And I also want to say that as slightly lonely and disorienting as it is to have you all be nameless, faceless boxes like the Brady Bunch on Zoom, it's so important to realize that women for all of American history, right up until that August date when we got the vote, were out there doing what you're doing, uncertain of what is to come, knowing that you're just on a bridge to somewhere, but you don't know what it looks like, not getting credit or not getting enough credit, and doing it anyway. And as the old cliche says, women are really good at asking for directions. Men will drive for 100 miles before they stop and say, I'm lost. And so I think at a moment when we all feel perhaps a little bit lost and a little bit unsure about what's next, with all due respect to Jill's chicken, which I'm sure would have been beautiful, we have been building bridges, we have been building community, we have been doing extraordinary, often unremunerated, unrecognized work long before we got the fancy jobs and the titles we have today. And so while this is a little destabilizing, it's also probably very familiar. Deep in your bones, you know what it feels like to have a community that doesn't have a fancy dinner and doesn't have necessarily beautiful tablecloths, but it has the essential things that women have always had, which is each other, and the ability to connect, communicate, mentor, and lift each other up. And so while I'm deeply sad that I'm not with you, and I wish that I could be with you, I do want to say that I think stripped it down to its absolute essence, this dinner is in some sense perfect, because it's a whole bunch of heroes doing heroic work, not knowing quite where we're going, but believing deeply in what we are building toward. I thank you so much for including me and letting me be a part of it. I wish you and your families great health and great meaning in this very, very strange time. Best of luck. I hope to see you in real time soon. Thank you.
Good evening, Women's Bar Association of DC.
It was so good, let's do it twice. Thank you, Dahlia. I don't know that it's necessarily a rule that the keynote is not supposed to make us all cry, but one more reason to bite down on my lip. Let me also say, you want to know how women do things and what we're doing in this unusual environment. I have to tell you, I'm sitting here, I'm getting messages from our past presidents, I'm getting messages from the board, from all the other women in my network who are cheering us on, because as Dahlia says, this is what we do. And it's really amazing to live it in real time. And I had to share what it's like sitting here. And then speaking of people who just keep their head down and keep doing what they do, I want to take a few minutes to celebrate our trailblazing past president, Patricia Gurne, who unfortunately we lost last month. Pat was actually married to another WBA past president, Jennifer Porter, who left us last year, both of them pillars in the WBA community. Luckily, we had the good sense to honor Pat previously as the 1999 Woman Lawyer of the Year. So we thought we'd spend a few minutes sharing some fun memories that we have. The first thing you'll see is we have an introduction from the 1999 Woman Lawyer of the Year ceremony from Judge Joyce Hens Green, of the DC District Court. And by the way, as many of us know, it's very funny what a small world DC is. And of course, the WBA makes that even smaller. Judge Green was my first legal employer. I interned for her after my first year in law school. And never did I imagine that I would be stepping into her footsteps as the president of the WBA. Pat was Judge Green's first law clerk. And so Judge Green did her introduction at the ceremony. And because of the vagaries of C-SPAN's archiving, you'll see a still picture of Judge Green, but you will hear her voice. And then we also have some video of Pat in her own words from our Centennial Oral History Project. So you'll hear that after Judge Green's introduction. So let's pause here so we can share that audio and video.
Honored guests behind me, honored guests ahead of me, all of you are honored guests. You cannot imagine what a very special moment this is. 30 years ago, a pint-sized dynamo adopted the Green family within days of coming to work for me at the Superior Court of the District of Columbia as my law clerk. Every evening, she would present herself at our home unexpectedly for 2 years. Always at the dinner hour and always toting her delicacy, a Big Mac. Our children, and now their children, simply adore her. And our friendship has been steadfast, even surviving the time that I had to wake especially early because at her request, I had to telephone her persistently in order to awaken her to be on time to take her bar examination. She is a woman of this century. She is a woman of the next century. She is a woman who has given so very, very much to our legal profession. She is a woman who has given to the community and to all of her friends. And do you know, each and every one of you is her friend. So here is to the woman with the endless capacity to do and the endless capacity to give. Please join me in tribute to our treasured friend, our extraordinary colleague who has honored us all, Patricia Gurne, Woman Lawyer of the Year.
The Women's Bar has been instrumental in my development as a lawyer. Also, I have made, and I've said this to women throughout the career, I've made friends in the Women's Bar that have been lifelong friends. And I'm getting close to proving that I'm toward the end of my life, and the people I'm still closest to are members of the Women's Bar who I got to know. We became friends over time. And so it's been lifelong friendships that I formed. And I used to sell that to other members because in a large city, it isn't easy to meet people. And you're around other fellow lawyers most of the time. So it would be nice to be able to have friends in legal things and then do things that are not legal. Not that they're illegal.
As we were practicing for this, now it's like songs that I've learned that I love singing along with. I want to say a special thanks to Sadina's husband, Chris Bailey, who did a lot of our video editing so that we could use those clips, which mean a whole lot to a whole bunch of us. And now, in one of my official last acts as president, I want to recognize our newly elected 2020-2021 WBA board, which you can see on your screen. President Sadina Montani, President-elect Bridget Bailey Lipscomb, Treasurer Lauren Brown, Treasurer-elect Mary Blatch, Secretary Latasha Ellis, and our directors Candace Beck, Ann Collier, Renee Lauren Ellis, Candace Gibson, Cynthia Hemphill, Sasha Hodge-Wren, Charlotte Cunin, Kathy Pagano, Anna Ratner, Natalie Roisman, Rebecca Simon, Roya Vasegi. And as I said earlier, leading this esteemed group starting on June 1st will be the next president of the Women's Bar Association, Sadina Montani. Sadina is a shareholder at Vedder Price, where she regularly represents employers in state and federal courts and before various administrative agencies, defending claims of race, sex, disability, and age discrimination, wrongful termination, wage and hour violations, and wage payment claims. She has written and spoken extensively on harassment issues, and in particular on the Me Too movement. She serves on the board of the DC Diaper Bank, among her many other community service commitments. And before entering the law, Sadina was a professional musician and performed with the Lansing Symphony Orchestra, the Southwest Michigan Symphony Orchestra, and the South Bend Symphony Orchestra, among others. So if this gig doesn't work out, Sadina has a very solid fallback plan. She has long been dedicated to the WBA despite her fallback plan, having served as treasurer on the board of directors and as a leader and visionary on our casino night efforts. Sadina has been my rock this year, my better half, my cheerleader, and now my sister for life. Although the other day I told her she was a really good wife too, so now maybe we're sister wives, maybe we can be both. Sadina is full of energy and great ideas, and she is everything that you want in a leader. And now join me in recognizing that I was so excited last year when I received our crystal gavel that I took a picture of it in my office. And so of course, right now, I'm supposed to be handing Sadina this crystal gavel, which is safely sitting in quarantine in my office in Washington, DC. That's what I would be handing to Sadina if we were on stage together. And so with that crystal gavel, Sadina, I pass on to you this gavel of leadership with all of the privileges and responsibilities that the office of the president confers. Please join me in welcoming Sadina Montani.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Jill, for that really generous introduction. I am so excited to be taking the reins as WBA president and following you, my friends. Before I preview my bar year, let me just take a moment on behalf of the WBA membership and its board to thank you, Jill. Like so many other things right now, your bar year and our celebration of it have been completely derailed by this pandemic. But consistent with your leadership during this year and your many years of WBA service, you have handled it with grace. And when you have thought about doing otherwise, you have known to text me first. You've kept our community connected, and you have pushed the WBA to quickly embrace online programming and networking in new and innovative ways. Since we aren't together in person, many of us on the board have recorded personal messages of thanks for you. We did not want you to be too teary-eyed this evening, but our executive director, Carol Montoya, hi Carol, will be emailing you a link to these videos later. You better change out of your suffragette white before you watch. I don't want you getting mascara on anything. And you grab some Kleenex. We love you. This pandemic has not only changed how we gather and how we celebrate, it has unfortunately exposed some of the worst in human nature. I was just reading a piece today about the racism that Asian American nurses and doctors on the front lines of this battle are experiencing. Related to that, I wanted to share that a few weeks ago, the WBA signed on to a statement issued by the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of DC, APABA DC, condemning the xenophobic racist rhetoric that has been on the uptick in the wake of this pandemic. 20 local bar associations and law school organizations signed on to this statement. And I mention this now not only to more vocally and publicly condemn the xenophobic and racist rhetoric, but also because the APABA DC statement that the WBA and others co-signed is a perfect example of the mutual support and collaboration I am hoping to encourage during my bar year. My theme for the next bar year is the importance of allies and friends. And so when Erica Lai, APABA DC's incoming president, reached out to me to see if the WBA would be interested in signing on to this statement, I was eager to bring this to Jill and to the rest of the board, not only because signing on was the right thing to do, which it was, it also presented an important opportunity to set the tone for the coming bar year, for the WBA to be an ally to APABA DC and the Asian American community. So Consistent with the theme of the importance of allies and friends, I hope to focus our efforts in programming on a few different areas in the coming year. First, on encouraging and educating allies. Let me start by encouraging you all to join us. If you are here, you're an ally. It is that simple. And specifically to the men who have joined us this evening and who often join us in person for the annual dinner and for other events, join us, become members. Add us to your law firm bio, to your LinkedIn profile. Share with your colleagues and your clients, men and women, that you believe in advancing the interests of women lawyers. Broadcast that you are an ally. And know that we will be developing programming focused on how we can help allies like you be better allies to us and to the rest of our community. I also want to focus on how we, the WBA membership, can be better allies. Our Women of Color Task Force, which held a wildly successful half-day seminar in the spring of 2019, has not been and will not be dormant. The task force has been working to design and establish a pilot program in collaboration with corporate and law firm partners to offer practical, realistic, and actionable support to those entities as they seek to tackle the abysmal prospects the data show women of color continue to face in the legal profession. The WBA had planned to march in the Pride Parade next month, which of course has been canceled. We will find ways to support our LGBTQ members and friends and to shine a light on the important role they have played and continue to play in our community. At the Women's Bar Association Foundation's grant awards ceremony back in early March, we heard Pat Gurne, shortly before she passed away, share that she met her late wife, Jennifer Porter, through her WBA network. I had never heard that story before, and I have to tell you, my heart nearly burst learning that two stalwarts in this community met through this community. I've also reached out to a number of the other affinity voluntary bar associations in town to discuss collaborative events, which I hope will be a regular part of our bar activities this year. I want to focus on the ways our overlapping memberships can build each other up. And finally, a note on the importance of friends. This community has had to come together recently around a fair amount of really sad news. And like Pat Gurne shared in her oral history, these are lifelong friendships that are built here. I am confident that Jill and Bridget and I will be texting the incoming WBA president in 2033 to give her advice about programming and the direction of the WBA. Encouraging a spirit of friendship is actually part of our mission statement. So I want to find ways for us to nurture and honor those friendships during the next bar year and beyond. And lastly, I just want to say thank you for trusting me with the stewardship of this historic and important organization. I hope to make you all proud. And of course, I cannot wait to see you all in person soon. But since I can't see you in person soon, please join us for this virtual networking event that we've planned afterwards. Information for which will be on the screen in a moment and for which you should have received login information. To be perfectly frank, we do not exactly know how this will go, but if you are game, please join us. As Jill often says, we are building this thing as we're flying it, and you can expect a lot of this type of experimentation in the next bar year. Thank you in advance for your willingness to experiment with us and be our guinea pigs. Have a great night, everyone, and see you in the networking Zoom.